I want to talk a little bit here about the my first impressions of the model here that I received from Jacques, and I have to say I am very impressed. It turned out extremely well, better than I'd hoped on my cheap little 3D printer, which is busy over there printing up another one just to play with. But I can already see that I've got one modification I'm going to have to do, and that's got nothing to do with the design. It's just the way my printer works. And what you can see here is sort of like a head-on view of the original head shell in metal. And here is the Jacques version, which is identical in every way, and with the exception, with the this big god awful hole that they have in the original, because it was for mono head shells, and then you had this little chummy that stuck through, and then basically you flip the direction. Oops, I just dropped it down here. You flip the direction, and it had actually two styluses on it, and you were able to go from a 78 needle or stylus to a LP stylus, because they were different sizes. So I like the fact that this new model doesn't have that big hole, because obviously most people are going to be using stereo carts. And I also like the fact that he added this little line marker, which is not on my original. Maybe later variants did have the line, I'm not sure. But this will give you an idea of where dead center is, so that when you're placing your arm onto the record, you know exactly where your stylus is going to be in the middle. Looking at the interior, the underside. Oh, and then the other thing that I noted was, if you look at this arm piece, you can see how this has a little bit of a drop down on the end of the arm piece, and it makes like a little cradle for your finger. On this one, it didn't reproduce well. Now the model does have it, but the reason is because I printed it on the plate, and of course it's very difficult for one of these PLA printers to print in space. It usually needs something, it needs to pop onto another layer. So typically what you do when using these PLA printers is to build a lattice or a support structure, so that you're able to print in space. And despite the fact I printed it as is, you can actually see that at the end it just couldn't cope with printing this little hang down piece here, which so I'm going to have to go back with my my CAD program and build kind of like a stanchion there that will be cut away at the very end once it's printed out, and that way I can get that to form properly, because you can actually see it's very rough, because it had a hard time printing really that first layer out in the middle of space, so it got all spaghetti sort of strung, and I cut it all off. You can see all the strands and everything that were sort of hanging down as the printer made every attempt to be able to print it out in the middle of space. So typically what I'll do is I'll just build a couple of stanchions there, and then that way it'll build as the print job goes on, and then you just cut them away as sacrificial support structures. So that came out way better than I had expected, and for the first print I'm going to have to do a few modifications just to improve it for my printer. For a resin printer, I don't think you'd have that problem. Underneath, printed again. This part, you got to realize, when it's printed like this, that's printing in space, and that turned out fairly well, because it did have the walls nearby, and it just sort of, you can see a little bit of stranding here, which I'm going to get a Dremel tool and I'll just clear all of that out. I just didn't have one handy down here in the basement. It's out in the dark garage, and it's late at night right now. So I just wanted to, and then I want to do a little bit of cleaning up. So some of the edges are still a little bit frayed from where I peeled it off of the support structure to keep it nice and tight on the bed so it doesn't shift or anything like that. So that turned out very well. And these sleds, I'm not quite sure how these work. I think what what Jacques has in mind here is to have a screw go through there, probably bore that out with a drill or whatever, and then that middle piece would have the screw or the bolt go into there, or the nut go in there, and then the bolt would go in through the top, and this would flip probably this way, and then that way you can have your bolt sticking through up into your into the cartridge, and I believe it would go in like that where you can slide this back and forth. I think that's the intent, and of course it's a really, really good fit. So I've printed off a couple of these because who knows, maybe you'd want to have a couple of cartridges that you can swap out just by popping one bolt or whatever. And then of course these bullet pieces here, as expected, they're a much thinner diameter than the hole, because these are supposed to be the center core of an aluminum tube that will eventually, this will pop in, and you'll get some DB9 or DB25 female sockets. You might have to take a really fine drill bit and just core those out because of the the stranding in the printing process. But you can actually, they go all the way through, so it came out pretty good. But like I say, you might have to ream those out a bit just to get those DB9 or DB25 sockets to fully go through, and then have a wire soldered on, and then into the silver or the aluminum collar, which in turn would be fitted there. And like the original, you would have to have some way of putting that little pin on there, and then have, so those are the sockets that we're trying to emulate. And it turned out very, very, very well. So I got some playing ahead of me, I think. And so I've obviously left the needle out because or the stylus out, because I didn't want to ding that up. This is a really botched job here too, and that's one I've been meaning. It works, but I've just been meaning to tidy that up with better quality wiring and everything. So that's the original, very, very heavy, and that's the problem with my tone arm, is it's this being so heavy, I can't get it under about 3.5 grams. I think is the lightest I can get this thing going at. So by having this, which weighs considerably less than that Headshell, with this frame arrangement, I think it'll work great. So for a first run attempt, I think it turned out exceptionally well. And now I got to figure out where I can get this 8mm aluminum tubing, really thin stuff, so I can pop that inside, and figure out how I'm going to interface that with the arm on my Lenco L70 turntable. So well done, Jacques. I'm absolutely floored with how much you've progressed with this design. I still may try to find a local resin guy that has a resin printer or whatever, and see if I can get one of those built up, and it'd probably be a lot better. But this is on my fine setting, so you can see that it's it's not that bad. It really came out well, and it's very solid. So there you have it. My first impressions of what I think is going to be a workable headshell for anybody that owns a Lenco and wants to have multiple headshells so they can support multiple different carts by hot swapping. So thank you, Jacques. You did an outstanding job. Well done.